Hello, scholars. Today we are beginning one of the most important units in the entire UGC NET English Literature syllabus. Now, let me ask you a question. Okay, if I say Shakespeare, everyone knows him. If I say Milton, everyone knows him. If I say Dante, everyone knows him. But have you ever wondered where all these writers learned their literary techniques? Where did the idea of epic poetry originate? Where did drama begin? Where did literary criticism begin? Where did philosophy begin? The answer is ancient Greece. And the civilization that preserved, adopted, and spread these ideas across the world was Rome. That is why we study Greco-Roman literature. Okay, so can anyone tell me which is older, Shakespeare or Homer? Obviously, Homer, yeah? Not just older. Homer lived almost 2000 years before Shakespeare. So, Greek is the origin. Rome is the adaptation of literature, and Europe is where literature developed. See, civilizations die, empire collapse, but literature survives. That is why we can still hear the voice of Homer after nearly 3000 years. Okay, scholars. So why study Greco-Roman literature? Many students make a mistake. They think this unit is just history. It is not. It is the foundation of literary studies. Just imagine buying the latest smartphone. The latest version is exciting, right? But unless you understand the operating system underneath, you never understand how it works. Greek literature is the operating system of Western literature. For example, when Shakespeare writes tragedy, it's a Greek influence. When Milton writes epic, it's Greek influence. When Eliot discusses criticism, it's Greek influence. When Freud names the Oedipus complex, it's Greek influence. So if a question contains Homer, Plato, Aristotle, Oedipus, catharsis or mimesis, then immediately think it is Greco-Roman unit. Why do universities still teach Aristotle? Because many dramatic theories still begin with Aristotle. So, scholars, by the end of this course, you will start seeing Greece and Rome hidden inside almost every major literary work. Okay, scholars, we then move on to timeline overview. First, one second. Greek Dark Age. Then comes Archaic Age. Then comes Classical Age. Then comes Hellenistic Age. Then comes Roman Republic. Then comes Roman Empire. So, children, you may often memorize these literary periods like shopping list, but that is dangerous. Consider literary history like a story. Okay, Dark Age, Episode 1. Civilization declines. It's Episode 1. Episode 2. Archaic period. Homer appears. Epic poetry begins. Episode 3 is Classical Age. Athens became the intellectual capital. Drama, philosophy, criticism emerge. Episode 4. Hellenistic Age. Alexander spreads Greek culture. Episode 5. Roman rises. Episode 6. Roman Empire become dominant. Yes, children. You may often confuse with classical period and Hellenistic period. Remember, classical is equal to Athens, and Hellenistic is equal to Alexander. Scholars imagine a world without universities, internet, printing press. Yet, that civilization produced some of the greatest literature in history. Yes, and ancient Greece was not a single country. It consisted of city-states. Example, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes. Each functioned almost like an independent nation. Imagine if Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and Mumbai were separate countries constantly competing with one another. So think about it. Competition created excellence. War created heroes. Heroes created stories. And stories created literature. Why do you think epic poetry becomes popular during periods of warfare? Because societies admire heroic deeds. Ancient Greece consists of city-states. Yeah, those are Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and each functioned almost like an independent nation. So, scholars, now let's discuss a period students often ignore, the Greek Dark Age. After the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, trade declined, literacy declined, cultural development slowed, and this period lasted roughly from 1100 BC to 800 BC. 1100 BC to 800 BC. Imagine if all universities suddenly disappeared, all libraries vanished, the internet stopped working. Knowledge would suffer enormously, right? That is similar to what happened. Dark Age isn't equal to no culture. Dark age is equal to reduced records and cultural decline. So, why do historians call it a dark age? Because people become less intelligent? No, that is not right. Because we possess fewer records. There were only fewer records. Dark age refers to lack of historical evidence, not lack of human intelligence. The archaic period. It lasts from 9th to 5th century BC. After darkness comes revival, and the archaic age witnesses growth of city-states, rise of trade, development of writing, and emergence of literature. Most importantly, Homer appears. Okay, so if you think of archaic period, you have to think of three poets: Homer, Hesiod, and Sappho. If today's India has celebrities, who do you think were the celebrities of ancient Greece? Of course, poets, and especially Homer. Yeah, you can have a memory trick like HHS. Homer, Hesiod, and Sappho. Rise of the city-states. 8th century Renaissance. The archaic period saw the birth of the polis and the first Olympics. Increased prosperity allowed for the patronage of bards like Homer. This era moved from anonymous folk tales to identifiable poets with distinct voices and thematic concerns. Homer, the blind bard. Now we meet perhaps the most influential poet in human history. Almost nothing definite is known about Homer. That itself is fascinating. What we know about him? Tradition says he is a blind poet. He is a wandering bard and a oral storyteller. Imagine a legendary YouTube creator with billions of views. Everybody knows the videos. Nobody knows exactly who the creator is. See to it. Without Homer, Virgil impossible, Dante impossible, Milton impossible. Can you tell me which works are attributed to Homer? Yes. The answer is the Iliad and the Odyssey. Homer teaches us something profound. A writer's work can become immortal even when his biography disappears. The Iliad, Wrath of Achilles. When students hear Trojan War, they think the story is about Troy. Actually, Homer is more interested in people than battles. Coming to the Iliad is not about the entire Trojan War. This is a famous net trap. Then, what is the central theme of the Iliad? Yes, it is not Trojan War, it is the Wrath of Achilles. Iliad is equal to Achilles. Achilles becomes angry with Agamemnon. His anger changes the fate of thousands. And this poem studies pride, anger, heroism, and mortality. Think of a talented employee who becomes angry and resigns. One person's decision affects an entire company, and that is Achilles. Coming to the Odyssey, if the Iliad is a poem of war, the Odyssey is a poem of survival. Odyssey is equal to Odysseus. After Troy falls, Odysseus spends 10 years trying to return home. 10 years. He faces cyclops, sirens, sea monsters, temptations. The Odyssey teaches that intelligence can be more powerful than strength. You can compare Achilles with action hero and Odysseus with strategic thinker. Come on, say, who would survive longer in modern life, Achilles or Odysseus? Yes, of course, exactly, Odysseus. Modern society rewards intelligence and adaptability. Okay, so you can, in the meanwhile, let me give you some questions so you can think about it. Why is Greco-Roman literature important? And what are the major Greek periods? What characterizes the Dark Age? Why is Homer important? And what is the central theme of the Iliad and the Odyssey? So, scholars, before we move ahead, let's revisit what we learned. We saw how Greek civilization emerged from the Dark Age. We studied the archaic period. We met Homer, the father of epic poetry. And also, we understand that the Iliad is all about wrath of Achilles and the Odyssey is all about journey of Odysseus. Now, something remarkable happens. Greek literature begins moving away from heroes and wars. For the first time, literature starts exploring the human heart. And that takes us to a woman poet who changed literary history. And that is Sappho. So, scholars, let me ask you a question. When was the last time you wrote a personal message to someone? A text message, a WhatsApp status, a poem about your feelings? Most literature today is personal, but that was not always the case. Before Sappho, literature focused mainly on kings, heroes, wars, and gods. With Sappho, literature enters the world of personal emotions. Okay, who was Sappho? Sappho lived on the island of Lesbos. She is often called the 10th muse. One of the greatest lyric poets in history. The 10th muse is one of the greatest lyric poets in history. If Homer represents epic poetry, Sappho represents lyric poetry. Homer is like a blockbuster historical film. Sappho is like a personal diary. Do you understand? Okay. Can you guess why is she important? Because she introduces personal voice, individual experience, and emotional intensity. These later become essential elements of modern poetry. Which do you think is easier to write? A poem about a war or a poem about your own feelings? Actually, personal poetry is often more difficult because it requires honesty. Many students remember Sappho only as a female poet, and that is not enough. She transformed poetry from public experience to personal experience. So, Greek literature has now discovered the individual. Next, Greek civilization discovers something even bigger. It discovers the power of human reason. Classical Greece dates between 5th and 4th century BC. If the archaic period gave us Homer, the classical period gave us genius. The center of Greek civilization became Athens. And one of the most important figure of this period is Pericles. And under his leadership, arts flourished, philosophy flourished, and democracy flourished. Imagine a city where Shakespeare is writing, Einstein is teaching, Leonardo da Vinci is painting, all at the same time, and that was Athens. Whenever you hear drama, philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, just think classical Athens. Why was Athens important? Because people began asking what is truth, what is justice, what is beauty, and what is knowledge. And civilization become great not when they have wealth. Civilization become great when they begin asking difficult questions. And the first people to ask those difficult questions systematically were the philosophers. Athens became the cultural hub. Democratic expansion. Under Pericles, Athens reached its political and cultural height. Patronage. Massive public funds were used for building projects like the Parthenon and funding theatre festivals. The Agora, a marketplace of ideas where citizens debated philosophy, politics, and law. Intellectual magnet. Thinkers from all over the Greek world flocked to Athens to share knowledge. Okay, scholars, now we are going to see about pre-Socratic philosophers. Imagine living in a world where people explain everything through mythology. For example, thunder occurs because the god is angry, rain occurs because the god is happy. You know what? The pre-Socratics did something revolutionary. They asked, can nature be explained logically? Thales, the first philosopher, he asked what is the basic substance of the universe, and he answered it is water. Everything is made of water, plant, animals, human. And you know what? Anaximander disagreed. He said reality comes from something infinite. And yes, Anaximander is the pupil of Thales. Then comes Heraclitus. He is one of the most famous. He said everything changes. Can you step into the same river twice? If V says yes, Heraclitus says no, because the river is constantly changing and you are changing too. If you have stepped in the river yesterday, it is not the same today. It changed. Think of social media. Every second, new posts, new trends, new opinions, constant change. And Heraclitus would smile and say, I told you so. Right? And then comes Parmenides. Parmenides is completely opposite. He said nothing changes and change is an illusion. He said reality is one and unchanging. And Pythagoras. If we hear Pythagoras, we would eventually remember of mathematics, but he is not only a mathematician but also a philosopher. So remember, scholars, Heraclitus spoke about change, Parmenides, stability. Okay. One of the famous quotations in philosophy is, you cannot step into the same river twice, and that was said by Heraclitus. And these philosophers prepared the ground. Then came the man who changed philosophy forever, and that is Socrates. Socrates never wrote a single book, yet he became one of the most influential thinkers in history. Instead of lecturing people, he asked questions, and that was Socratic method. Suppose someone says, I know what justice is, Socrates would ask, what is justice? And the person answers, Socrates asks another question and another and another. Eventually, the person realizes he doesn't know as much as he thought. See, scholars, a good teacher does not merely provide answers. A good teacher helps students discover answers, and that is the Socratic method. A very important quote that I want to say here: the unexamined life is not worth living. You know what? Socrates wrote nothing. We know him mainly through Plato. And Athens sentenced Socrates to death. Why? Because he questioned accepted belief. Sometimes truth is unpopular. One young man watched Socrates die, and that young man was Plato. Scholars, Plato is perhaps the most important philosopher in Western history. Plato belonged to an aristocratic family. His real name was Aristocles. Socrates' death changed Plato's life. He lost faith in politics and turned completely to philosophy. And he founded the Academy in 387 BC. The Academy in 387 BC. The first great institution of higher learning. Think of the academy as the Oxford or Cambridge of ancient Greece. And there was a famous sign at the entrance: let no one ignorant of geometry enter. That was written at the entrance gate of the academy. Academy was founded by Plato, and Lyceum was founded by Aristotle. Just remember these two things. Academy founded by Plato, Lyceum by Aristotle. Now let's discuss Plato's most famous literary contribution. Plato never wrote a separate book on literature. His ideas appear in dialogues like Republic, Ion, and Phaedrus. Republic, Ion, and Phaedrus. According to Plato, art imitates reality. Problem? Reality itself is already an imperfect copy of ideal truth. Therefore, art becomes an imitation of an imitation. Imagine a real chair and the painting of chair, and the painting is 2 steps away from truth. An ideal truth, a real chair, a painting of chair, and the painting is 2 steps away from the truth. And this is what he attempts to say: art becomes an imitation of an imitation. An ideal truth, real objects, art. Plato says reality itself is an imperfect copy of ideal truth, and art is the imitation of an imitation. Why Plato distrusted poetry? Because poetry appeals to emotions, and emotions may weaken reason. Why does Plato ban poets from the ideal state? Because poetry may encourage irrationality. Fortunately for poets, Plato had a brilliant student who disagreed, and that is Aristotle. If Plato is the dreamer, Aristotle is the scientist. He is the student of Plato, tutor of Alexander the Great, and founder of the Lyceum. Plato asks, what should reality be? And Aristotle asks, what is reality actually like? Plato is an idealist and Aristotle is an observationist, and his greatest contribution to literature is a small book called Poetics. Now we are going to see about Aristotle's Poetics and the birth of tragedy. Poetics is the first systematic study of literature. Aristotle's view is poetry is natural and humans learn through imitation. Therefore, he says art is valuable. Catharsis, most important net concept. Means emotional purification. For example, when watching a tragic film, you feel fear, pity, sadness, and afterward you feel emotionally lighter, and that is catharsis. For example, movies like serious tragedies or emotionally intense dramas often create catharsis. Come on, say scholars, who introduced catharsis? Yes, it's Aristotle. So notice the intellectual journey. Homer explored heroes, Sappho explored emotions, pre-Socratics explored nature, and Socrates explored ethics, Plato explored ideal truth, and Aristotle explored literature itself. The Greeks were gradually discovering every major dimension of human existence. Now think of these questions. Why is Sappho important? You can think about difference between epic and lyric poetry and all that. Who founded academy? Why did Plato distress poetry? Who founded the Lyceum? What is catharsis? Who said everything changes? Who said the unexamined life is not worth living? Now we are going to see about Greek theatre. How many of you have watched a film recently? Now imagine a world without cinema, Netflix, YouTube, television. What would entertainment look like? For ancient Greeks, theatre was not merely entertainment, it was education, religion, philosophy, and social commentary, all combined together. And there was the connection to Dionysius. Greek drama emerged during festivals dedicated to Dionysus. Remember this forever. If there is no Dionysius, no Greek drama. The closest modern equivalent is a mixture of a religious festival, a TED talk, a film festival, a public debate, all happening simultaneously. In the same way, Greek drama developed from religious rituals. Now we are going to see about the structure of the Greek theatre. Suppose you are entering a Greek theatre, what would you see? Theatron or koilon, where audience are seated. Orchestra, circular space, where the chorus performed. Thymele, altar dedicated to Dionysius. Scene or scene, the stage. Actors entered and existed through it. Proscenium, it's acting area. Diazoma, passage dividing seating sections. This is Koilon, and this is orchestra. Circular space where the chorus performed. Thymel is an altar dedicated to Dionysius. Scheme. This is a scheme. This one. It's a stage. And then comes proscenium. This one. This is proscenium. Diazoma, passage dividing the seating tiers. This one. Okay scholars, now we are going to see about structure of Greek tragedy. Greek tragedy follows a structure far more disciplined than modern drama. Its components are prologue, background information, opening scene that sets the context, its background information. Parados is the entry of the chorus. Episodes, where main dramatic action happens, main action involving the actors. Stasima is all about choral songs. Exodus is the final scene or conclusion. So prologue is introduction, episode main scene, Stasima's commentary, and Exodus is ending. Okay scholars, why do you think Greeks used a chorus? In order to explain events, provide commentary, and represent public opinion. Now we are going to see about Aeschylus. Scholars, if Homer is the father of epic poetry, Aeschylus is the father of tragedy. He is the father of tragedy, and he lived between 525 to 456 BC. And he introduced the second character. Why is he important? Before Aeschylus, there is only one character and chorus, but after Aeschylus, the real dramatic conflict became possible. Imagine cricket with only one team. Not interesting, right? And drama requires conflict, and Aeschylus creates that conflict. And his famous works are Oresteia, the Persians, and Prometheus Bound. Come on, say who introduced the second character? Yes, it is Aeschylus. So just remember, Aeschylus is equal to addition who added second character. And now we are going to see about Oresteia. This is not just a tragedy, it is a trilogy. Oresteia consists of 3 parts: Agamemnon, libation bearers, and Eumenides. So, scholars Agamemnon returns from Troy. His wife Clytemnestra murders him, and his children Orestes and Electra seek revenge, and Orestes kills his mother, and then guilt and punishment follow. And the trilogy traces civilization's movement from personal revenge to organized justice. Today, we do not settle disputes through blood revenge, right? We go to court, and Aeschylus is dramatizing that historical shift. Many students only remember revenge, and you know what? Justice is the deeper theme here. And now we are going to see about Sophocles. If Aeschylus built tragedy, Sophocles perfected it. He introduced the third character. Maximum character in Greek tragedy is 3, and his main works are Oedipus Rex, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone. Oedipus Rex Oedipus at Colonus, Antigone. Can a person escape destiny? And that is all is about Oedipus story, and this is Sophocles' central question. Oracle predicts that Oedipus will kill his father and marry his mother, and he attempted to avoid fate, and that actually fulfilled it. And there is a famous Sphinx riddle in the story Oedipus Rex. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? And the answer is human beings. You can often today ask this question: do we able to control our lives? Sophocles asked the same question 2500 years ago. And Oedipus Rex is Aristotle's model tragedy, and that is very important. And now we are going to see about Euripides and his major work, Medea. Now we are going to meet the rebel among tragedians, that is Euripides, who did something revolutionary. He made heroes psychologically realistic. Aeschylus represent what about Aeschylus? We shall compare between Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Aeschylus' heroes represent moral forces. Sophocles' heroes represent fate. And Euripides' heroes feel like real people. And Medea is all about story of betrayal and revenge. Jason abandons Medea. Jason, who's the husband of Medea, he abandons Medea. And Medea takes revenge upon Jason. She kills Jason's new bride and her own children. In this story, is Medea a villain or a victim? Discuss. Euripides forces audiences to confront uncomfortable moral complexity, and many modern psychological dramas owe more to Euripides than to humor, because Euripides is equal to psychological realism. And now we are going to see about Greek comedy. Okay, scholars, so far we have explored tragedy. Now let's laugh. First, we are going to see about Aristophanes. Aristophanes is all about old comedy, political satire, and he mocked real people. Examples include the clouds. Okay, and in the clouds, he ridicules Socrates. The clouds. He ridicules Socrates. And Aristophanes, you can compare him to an actual people who mocked real people. Menander is all about new comedy. Instead of politics, he focused on families, love, misunderstandings, and stock characters. Just remember, Aristophanes is all about old comedy and Menander is all about new comedy. Now let us go through once with Plato's criticism. Theory of Mimesis is all about art is an imitation of an imitation which is thrice removed from the truth. Exile of poets. He exiled poets. In his Republic, Plato argued for banning poets because they appeal to emotions rather than reason. And moral censorship. He believed literature should only serve to instill civic virtue in the guardians of the state. Aristotle's Poetics. Aristotle's Poetics talks about three main components, which is tragedy, epic poetry, and comedy. And Aristotle redefined mimesis as a creative act and catharsis as a healthy emotional release. And scholars, now we are going to discuss about Hellenistic age. So what happens when Greek culture leaves Greece? Then begins the Hellenistic age. And Alexander the Great is one of the important figure of the Hellenistic age. Alexander conquered Egypt, Persia, and parts of India too. What is the result of it? Greek culture spread everywhere. So scholars remember Hellenistic period begins after Alexander's death in 323 BC. Hellenistic is equal to Greek globalization. That's it. Please remember that. Now we are going to see about rise of Rome. While Greece was spreading culture, Rome was already gaining power. Monarchy was overthrown. What is republic? Republic is all about there was no more monarchy. Elected representatives governed. And the first triumvirates were Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Many students confuse first and second triumvirates. Remember that. And Caesar was assassinated on 15th March 44 BC. It is called Ides of March. Who has heard Shakespeare's famous warning? Beware the Ides of March. You recognize it, right? Okay, scholars, let us do 5 minutes revision. Yeah, who introduced the second character? Yes, of course, Aeschylus. Who introduced the third character? Sophocles. Then what is the central theme of Oedipus Rex? Yes, fate. Which tragedian emphasized psychology? Very good, Euripides. Old comedy? Aristophanes. New comedy? Menander. Hellenistic period begins after whose death? Yes, it is Alexander the Great. What happened on the Ides of March? Yes, Julius Caesar was assassinated. Now we are going to see about Augustus Caesar and the Roman Golden Age. Imagine a nation torn apart by civil war. There were political assassinations, power struggles, violence everywhere, and that was Rome before Augustus. Let me tell you a brief historical background. After Julius Caesar's assassination, civil war was erupted. Eventually, Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and Octavian became Augustus Caesar, the first Roman emperor. Keep in mind, Augustus, first emperor. Then we are going to see about Pax Romana. It's a most important achievement, meaning Roman peace. Just imagine a country finally achieving stability after years of political chaos. Suddenly roads improved, trade grows, education develops, arts flourish, and that is exactly what happened under Augustus. Great literature often flourishes during periods of stability. Come on, say who inaugurated Pax Romana? Yes, it is Augustus Caesar. A sword may build an empire, but only peace can build a civilization. Virgil. If Homer is Greece's greatest epic poet, Virgil is Rome's greatest epic poet. Remember, Homer, Greece. Virgil, Rome. Why Virgil matters? Virgil was not simply writing stories, he was helping Rome understand itself. His main works were Eclogues, Georgics, and Aeneid. Eclogues, Georgics, and Aeneid. Have you ever heard people say a nation needs a story about itself? The Aeneid provides that story. Every nation creates narratives about its origin. Virgil creates Rome's literary origin story. And Virgil is called the national poet of Rome. And his epic became national epic. The Aeneid. So scholars, what happens to a refugee after war destroys his homeland? And the hero is Aeneas, a survivor of Troy. Aeneas is Trojan, not Roman. Students lost marks here. After Troy falls, Aeneas journeys to Italy. Eventually, he becomes ancestor of the Romans. Just compare Virgil and Homer. Achilles seeks glory. Odysseus seeks home. Aeneas seeks destiny. Please write this, you will remember it forever. The Aeneid transforms epic from personal heroism into national mission. Many leaders today speak about duty, nation, sacrifice, and Virgil's Aeneas embodies exactly these ideals: duty, nation, and sacrifice. The Aeneid combines elements of which Homeric epics? Yes, the answer is Iliad and Odyssey. In Divine Comedy, let me give you a literary connection. In Divine Comedy, Virgil becomes Dante's guide. Notice something beautiful here. A Roman poet becomes the guide of an Italian poet nearly 1300 years later, and that is literary immortality. Horace. Now we move from epic grandeur to everyday wisdom. Horace was a poet, critic, and satirist, and his main works are odes, satires, epistles, and ars poetica. And his most famous phrase is carpe diem, which means seize the day. Imagine constantly postponing happiness. Horace says life is uncertain, and he says enjoy the present responsibly. Students often think carpe diem originated with Epicurus, but you have to understand that this phrase itself comes from Horace. And ars poetica. It's very, very important for literary criticism. Ars poetica influenced Dryden, Pope, and neoclassical criticism as well. Just remember like this: Horace is all about balance, not extreme pleasure, not extreme seriousness, but balance. While we are talking, anyways, time is fleeing, right? Okay, let us move on to Ovid. If Virgil is Rome's statesman poet, Ovid is Rome's entertainer. Ovid is witty, he is playful, and he is sophisticated. And his major works are Ars Amatoria and Metamorphosis. The most important one, metamorphosis, which means transformation or change. Over 200 mythological stories. Gods transform humans, humans transform into animals, nature transforms constantly, and metamorphosis becomes the greatest source of mythology for Renaissance writers as well. Many Renaissance painters and poets learned mythology through Ovid. If a modern filmmaker wanted hundreds of fantasy stories, which classical text would be ideal? Yes, obviously, it is metamorphosis. And Ovid celebrates imagination more than political authority. You know what? Augustus banished Ovid, one of literature's greatest poets, died far away from the city that made him famous. And now, Seneca. Now literature becomes darker. Seneca the Younger, he was a philosopher, statesman, and playwright. And Stoicism is his central idea, which means control yourself and not circumstances. His central idea is all about control yourself and not circumstances. Let me give you an example for this. You cannot control traffic, but you can control your reaction, right? And that is Stoicism. Seneca's plays are famous for revenge, bloodshed, violence, and powerful speeches. And his most important work is Thyestes. Seneca influenced Renaissance revenge tragedy, just connected to Shakespeare. Without Seneca, Hamlet, Titus Andronicus, the Spanish tragedy would look very different. You have to remember Seneca is equal to blood and revenge. Okay, now let's discuss about Plautus and Terence. After all the tragedy, let's laugh again. Plautus, he is Roman comic playwright. He adopted Greek new comedy. And his features include mistaken identities, clever servants, foolish masters, and comic confusions. And his famous work is Menachmi. His famous work is Menachmi. It inspired Shakespeare's The Comedy of Errors. Just imagine, I would like to give a modern comparison. Many Bollywood comedy films still use plotting techniques. Do you get it? And then we can move on with Terence. He is a former slave but later freed. And he is more refined, more elegant, and more sophisticatedly written dialogue writer. And his famous work is Eunuch. If a question is asked whose style is more refined, the answer would be Terence. Plautus is more popular. Terence is more polished. Okay, scholars, let us do one final revision. Homer. Greek epic. Aeschylus wrote tragedy. Sophocles perfected tragedy. Euripides wrote about psychology. Plato talk about mimesis. Aristotle talked about catharsis. Virgil is a Roman epic poet writer. Horace, Carpe Diem, seize the day. Ovid wrote mythology. Plautus wrote comedy. Terence wrote refined comedy. So, scholars, we began this journey with Homer, a poet whose life remains a mystery. And we then traveled through Athens. We met philosophers who changed human thought. And we entered theatres where tragedy and comedy were born. And we followed Alexander across continents. We watched Rome rise to power. And we ended with Virgil, Horace, Ovid, Seneca, Plautus, and Terence. What should you remember from all this? Not merely names and dates. Remember that literature is a conversation across centuries. Homer speaks to Virgil. Virgil speaks to Dante. Dante speaks to Milton, and Milton speaks to us. And now, through your reading, that conversation continues. Thank you for exploring classical antiquity. And before you leave, I want you to answer one question in the comments. Who do you think had a great influence on literature? Homer, Plato, or Aristotle? And why? I would love to read your thoughts. If this lecture helped you understand the Greco-Roman period better, please like the video, share it with your fellow NET JRF aspirants, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next lecture. In our next class, we will move deeper into literary criticism and examine concepts that are frequently asked in UGC NET, SET, and PhD entrance examinations. Until then, keep reading, keep questioning, and remember, great literature is not studied, it is experienced. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next class.